All right, so welcome to Thanos Node, the intersection between business, technology, and life. And today I have Bob Unnold. Quick bio. Bob has spent his career building and scaling companies in the technology space and across various verticals, including manufacturing industries as well. Some of these experiences include Genesis Electronics, Mincron, Axxuun, Convergence Technology, and i3 Mobile. With multiple exits and IPOs under his belt, his wealth of experience as a founder, executive, advisor, and entrepreneur puts him at the very nexus. In other words, at the intersection between business and technology. So welcome, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you, Ilani.
So I just want to catch up with you. What's currently going on? I know there's a lot of things. I mean, you're one of the busiest people I've known. and thank you again, for taking the time to join this podcast. Firstly, what's going on? I mean, I know there's a lot of things going on with, Did You Remember Too? And then there's a few other things, but I'll give you the stage.
Sure. Well, thanks for the introduction. I am pretty well consumed. I'll put it this way, 6 days a week. It probably should be 7, but it's 6 days a week I'm consumed with Did You Remember To in our product attendant. It's a startup, probably my 5th or 6th startup. And our product is a combination of Bluetooth Low Energy Beacon and mobile app for just-in-time reminders, notices, and security alerts. So it is, from what we understand from the engineers at the manufacturer, EM Microelectronics, division of Swatch, that no one else in the world is using a Bluetooth Low Energy Beacon as we are. So it's exciting in that respect. It is unique in the world. We do have 2 patents on the core of our technology. It's IoT type technology. So that's what's going on. That's the busiest part. But I am on a couple of boards and fulfilling my obligations to those boards every month.
That's inspiring. So I've always wanted to ask, what is it like going through an IPO process? I know it's brutal, and you've been through that, and I just want you to share your experience just going through from soup to nuts. I mean, it has to be an intense experience.
I'll tell you, Ilani, that it's been a while since I did the IPO. So as with all interesting things, they kind of get muted over time. So I don't remember so much of the intensity of it, but I do remember of let's say, the workload involved with preparing for selecting the bankers. I have some interesting stories about selecting the bankers, the quiet period, and then the excitement actually of the IPO itself. And watching the stock price take off and realizing you're worth millions and then multiple millions of dollars, at least as far as the market is concerned, for some period of time. If one of the interesting stories was, and there's a moral to this particular one, know where your mute button is on your microphone. We took with one set of bankers who I won't use the name of. We had probably 8 to 12 people, our lawyers, accountants, some of our operating people in the room, and on the other end, and some of this bankers people in the room as well. But on the other end of the speakerphone, one of those tripod things in the middle of the conference room, conference table, was their Chicago office, and there were 3 people there. And so we, after probably 45 minutes or so, an hour, somebody called for a break. So we said, all right, let's take a break. Thinking that their mic was on mute in Chicago, we listened in as they said, oh man, we don't have a chance with these guys.
Wow.
And they went on from there. It was like one of those memorable moments. So for your listeners, the moral of that particular story is always make sure that you know when the mic is off.
See, now that's very interesting, because everybody, there's an old saying, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die, right? and and I think the morale of that is, the actions we take can have unintended consequences, right? And we always have to be cognizant, of our behaviors. Now, do you think much has changed, given current trends with IPOs and companies prematurely going public or raising funds at, just insane valuations?
Well, in today's marketplace, it's big dollars chasing the big deals. There's not a lot of the middle market. There's activity, but there's nothing at the smaller end. If you're not trying to raise 5 to 10 million at least, brokerage firms are not interested. We've got a system where they're not interested, but they don't want to give up control. The brokerage firms don't, through the SEC, they don't want to give up control of the marketplace. So instead of allowing the market to act more freely at the smaller level, the SEC continues to restrict the finders and not mini brokers, but finders basically from operating to help people, entrepreneurs raise funds. So there's a kind of a gray market that's occurred at that level. I think that there are way more of the large deals that you read about in the paper as compared to the mid-range deals that used to go on. And I'm not an expert by any means in that whole area because my whole focus is on starting companies and bringing them up and then selling them or bringing them to an IPO as it did. So when you're an entrepreneur, all your effort is going into how do I build the business? I'm not watching what the rest of the world is doing so much. You can't live in a vacuum, but it's pretty distracting if you think, oh, I can't raise money because the market is down. Well, you're just shooting yourself in the head because you've taken a negative approach. And some of the best money is raised between the Christmas and New Year's, meaning if you can find somebody that's in the office, you got an opportunity to talk with them and try and start to put a deal together. And that's
very curious because do you then think entrepreneurship is for everyone? Because I think nowadays, everywhere you turn, everybody is starting something. Everyone is an entrepreneur. Everyone has a startup. Everyone has something to pitch.
Well, maybe in our world, Alani, we see a lot more of that. I do. But a comment on entrepreneurs, you've got government trying to create entrepreneurs. They have entrepreneurial centers and incubators and all these great things. The problem with that is that you can't train somebody to be an entrepreneur. You can't. It's either in their DNA, and it's not really DNA, of course, but it's in their personality. They've got to have that stick-to-itness in the face of all adversity. That's what it takes, and you can't train somebody to do that. They either got the guts to do it or not. They've either figured out how to sleep at night, knowing that they've got a small payroll to meet and have no money in the bank. That's what it takes. So when you hear about the incubators and, the states in many ways trying to help by creating entrepreneurs, they're just, for the most part, they're setting people up for failure because they don't have what it takes to do it. There's a very small percentage of them of entrepreneurs that are actually true entrepreneurs.
That's That's actually a valuable insight. So I'm going to pivot very
Go ahead.
briefly, and that is, for what in your life do you feel the most grateful?
Well, that's a tough one. I'm a very positive person, so I think most grateful is my family. I'm a family man, and my wife and my 2 adopted kids. That has been what I would consider my most. I'm most grateful for that opportunity. And I'll tell you, quite frankly, I had to make that happen as far as adopting the kids is concerned. So it was sort of my entrepreneurial spirit, if you will, that didn't give up. We tried several times and finally came upon the right situation, and I made it happen. So I'm most grateful for my wife and the kids.
That's
so no business in there at all, huh?
No, I was expecting a few deals.
Nope. No,
awesome.
Not on the same level.
Yes, I think everything we do ties back to family, right? Because who do you share successes with? Family. Mm-hmm. Who do you lean on in the face of challenges and failure? Family, right? And who do we learn from? Family. So there's a grounding effect having family, and that's something I believe we should eternally be grateful for.
I might take a little exception with part of what you just said. Yes, in the past have leaned on family, because when you're starting a business, sometimes, as in my case, my wife was the breadwinner for a while as I started the business. So yes, that's leaning on family. But what I don't do is I don't bring home or share, if you will, all of the concerns and issues that I have, because that, opposites attract. So my wife would not want to hear all the things that I have in my head as issues that I need to solve. So I don't lean on her in that manner. So that would be my sort of exception to that. Overall, she knows what I do and what it takes, and is interested in it, in the businesses that I've developed, and likes participating in the success. The success aspects of it, but I don't share on any sort of regular basis all the problems and issues that I need to face, and I take that on myself.
Well, that's also insightful. I've always been curious on the concept of, whether it's governments or institutions, the concept of socializing the costs while privatizing the gains, because we see some industries where the value accrues to a few, right? We look at centralized systems, like say social media, for example, and search, where all these companies create freemium platforms like, Facebook, Instagram, and what have you, where people contribute, but socializing the cost of collecting all that data is one thing, but monetizing that data, basically the gains from it, is not equitable, where it goes. Now, on one hand, yes, the entrepreneurs who took the risks, all the risks, and to build a system and make it available, that's one case for it. But on the other hand, at what point do we start crossing that gray area, where is the accrual of value so heavily concentrated that it eventually creates an oligarchy where the government is forced to, quote unquote, intervene and start trying to, going back to your earlier point, train and manufacture entrepreneurs in an effort to force equitable redistribution of some sort. I wanted your insight on that.
Well, I think what you need to think about, Alani, is the history. If you know Ron Chernow as an author, he did The Titan, and it's interesting to think back 120 years or 140 years ago to 100 years ago or so, when Rockefeller Sr. Was building his business, and what in that same time frame when unions were starting up in the 1890s and onward, big business needs big government, needs big unions to balance off. The days where, it's that's where the balance is. That's why we need big government, if you will, to have the power to break up AT&T and create so much more. If you recall, in '83, the breakup of the Bell system, which has spun off so much more in terms of technology and lower prices for calls. If you remember, you're not that old, but if you remember back that far, in some way, it was a quarter to make a local phone call. And what do you pay to make a local phone call on your mobile phone now? A 1/100th of a cent, maybe, in your bill? I don't know.
Definitely.
So, it's if you look at history, you can see where we came from. We're heading that direction again, in the sense in the last 10 or 15 years with these social media platforms and Amazon. Our company deals with Amazon, and people are very comfortable buying from Amazon, but it is a behemoth. It's very difficult to work with as a seller. It's they have lots of tools and things, but it's very complex, and you have to do things the way they want it.
That's funny. That's funny because people don't realize that about 15% of every dollar spent goes to three companies: Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, to their cloud hosting. People don't realize that when the price of hosting cloud services goes up, it rolls down to commodities and regular items we buy.
Yep.
For example, McDonald's or some other bigger companies host their platforms and their supply chain management systems on one of these three cloud computing behemoths. So when this behemoth ups their cloud infrastructure pricing, what happens? The order management system, if it filters out, suddenly that burger goes up 5 cents. So it's not, so to your earlier point, you need big business and large institutions of states to coexist because they need each other. That's where the balance comes from.
We hope. It doesn't always work that way, and it takes decades sometimes for it to come about. We're heading towards the point where there's more and more talk about breaking Amazon up. Are we going to get our health care from Amazon just because they've been so successful in delivering consumer goods? Are we, where does it stop? Where do we? And it is better when you have more companies competing to provide the products and the services. It's just better to have things that way, but it takes a lot, as it did back in '83. It took decades to build up to the point where the government could step in and break up AT&T. I think we're headed that way in this decade, maybe later on this decade. Something's going to happen with Amazon and maybe Microsoft, maybe Apple. I mean, as they get into other things, into cars, right? They get into these things because they've got, 50 to 100 billion in cash sitting on the shelf and they got to figure out something to do with it. I could tell them what to do with it, but they won't listen to me.
So that's interesting. So that's funny you say that, because, when we've done a few deals together, and, I've always wondered, when it comes to deploying capital at scale, should investors deploy capital into R&D entities in the hopes of a return downstream, or runway-ready companies that have a very obvious key value proposition and a team that can execute?
Well, that's not exactly a question, but the description of that is what probably 90 some odd % of investors who invest in private companies are looking for, is something that's on the ramp, ready to take those dollars and go and sell a lot of product or service, not to do R&D. Maybe 10% of private investors are of the mindset that they're willing to see R&D go on and wait for their return, a somewhat longer trail to get to that return. There's an exception there, which is the healthcare field. Because of the FDA, it takes years often to get products approved, and investors in that field are in that 10%. They're ready to risk capital on what can be very huge returns, and have to wait for it. My company, Did You Remember To, we're at the start of that ramp up now. We're looking for $1 million in capital that'll basically take us on to the next level. We don't need to do any more R&D. It's all done and in place. So I can see the difference when I'm walking around with my hand out looking for funds between investor types. Some, it's just, they don't have the risk profile of, we don't have the risk profile that they can deal with. It goes back to, the same thing with the entrepreneurs. Lots of people might say they're entrepreneurs, but if they don't have the risk profile, they're really not an entrepreneur. They can't handle it. So most 90% of the private investors can't handle any earlier stage investment opportunities. What I've proposed to our congressman here, Jim Himes, is that it really would help if the federal government would do something like the states do. I think there's something like 17 or 19 states offer a 20 to 25% investor tax credit. So an investor puts money into a company. The state provides a tax credit, not a deduction, but a credit of 25% of what's been put in. So a $100,000 investment gets the investor $25,000 of tax savings in their state. And some of the states actually allow you, like Connecticut allows you to sell that. So you can transfer it and sell it. So I've had investors from out of state put in one recently $50,000, and I was able to sell his $12,500 tax credit for $10,000 to a local business guy, so he could use it for his taxes. So if the federal government would do the same thing, the risk profile of any smaller investment would really be dramatically improved. If you think about the metrics of say $100,000 investment, you get $25,000 back right away from the state. If you were to get another 25 back from the federal government in terms of taxes over the next 5 years, now you only have 50,000 at risk. And if the company goes belly up and you have to write the whole thing off, you're writing 100,000 off, which at most investors' tax bracket means they're saving 35,000 maybe. So maybe on a $100,000 investment, you've got a net of $15,000 you're going to lose if everything goes to hell in a handbasket. And your upside is not at all restricted. So that's my little commercial about, I think the federal government, and what it does, Alani, is it eliminates lots of middlemen. Because most investors and entrepreneurs know people who are potential investors. If you can get an investor to easily understand that for a $15,000 risk, they get $100,000 worth of stock, and the 100,000 times X as your upside. That makes a big difference.
Yeah, now that's smart investing, actually. Now, if I may pivot, if you could change anything about the way you were raised, what would it be?
Nothing. I think my parents did a great job, don't you?
Well, it depends.
Okay. I thought this was.
Everyone has a background and different idiosyncrasies, and I've always believed that everything that I experienced via my parents, right, wrong, or indifferent, however perceived at the time, is what led me here. Mm-hmm. And for that, I will eternally be grateful.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's family is interesting. So now, that being said, what do you value most in a friendship?
Honesty, reliability. I measure. I have an oddball way of measuring who's a real friend. My real friends can come into my house essentially without knocking. Hey, I'm here. They can go to my refrigerator and pull out a beer. I can do the same in their place. That's how you tell a real friend, a close friend, a real friend. If they can't do that, or you can't do that at their place, you might be friendly, you might be good acquaintances, but you're not really best of friends. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. I see a lot of people who confuse friendships and acquaintances. They go around, I've got 300-400 people who know me.
Yeah.
But I'd rather have 3 friends, than 3,000 acquaintances who, at best, are arm's distance.
Yeah. Sure.
It's interesting. So what's your most treasured memory?
From just period, right? From day one to now.
Correct.
Well, that's hard. That's a hard one, Alani. What's the most treasured memory? Actually, I will I'll tell you a tiny short story. My most treasured memory I can still picture is when my mother jumped up from the table on the porch and said, "My prayers have been answered." I had just returned from 4 or 5 weeks. No, it wasn't even that long. Probably 4 weeks. I hitchhiked to California when I was 18 by myself. And so they had no idea when I was getting back. This was in the days when there was no, this was 65, I guess. And so no cell phones, obviously. I think I called them once collect from California to let them know I was still alive. And I hitchhiked right back to home, had to walk up my block, I think. And my father, mother, and my younger sister were sitting there having dinner on the porch when I opened the door, and that was my mother's reaction. So, treasured memory. There you go.
Answered prayers are. So, wow, that must have been intense. Hitchhiking to California in 65.
Yeah.
It's very, very, that's an achievement. I mean, it's wow. Now, that being said, and I've been to your house a few times, and one of the things I recall when it stuck with me is you have a painting on the wall of a US president. And he actually sat for that painting.
Wilson. Yep.
Woodrow Wilson. How does it feel? I mean, it's such a critical part of this country's history to have that presence, because I believe certain things carry certain weight to them. How, I mean, what do you, since, I don't know how, I know you've had it there for a while, when you talk about that to people who may have, very little concept, of one, history, because I know you're a voracious reader and you know a thing or two, because I learn a lot from you quite a bit. How does it feel having that there? What does it remind you of every time you take a moment to regard it?
Well, it does make me think in terms of history. Wilson is talked about in Charno's book in terms of the Titan. Also talked about in several other books. I have not read a book specifically on Wilson, but I guess it because of the way it came to us, it brings me back to the family history in a sense. It was my wife's grandmother who had lent money to the artist who painted that picture when Wilson was in New York for the League of Nations, I think it was, in the 20s, early 20s. And he sat in those days, he sat for this painting for an hour or two. I think he might have been president at the time. He probably was president still at the time. And so she had it, and she wasn't able to pay my wife's grandmother back. And the artist offered that as compensation to wipe out the debt. So we ended up getting the picture into the family in a kind of an odd way. So it brings me back to history in a few different ways.
That's powerful.
It's interesting that you remember that too.
No, there's certain things, I am a student of history myself. And whenever I am, privileged to encounter pieces of history, those things make me think. It reminds me of where I am. It reminds me of the company I keep, the company I am with. And it humbles you. It makes you appreciate, in a sense, because I believe in fate. I think fate leads us to certain things, and to be in the company and just being in that place at that time, having that experience, those things stay with me. That's why I brought it up. Now, I'm going to pivot. What's your most terrible memory?
Terrible memory. Well, I guess I have a few in a sense, not terrible. I have a few that were just bad things that happened, not necessarily to me. We had one occasion, I was at sea with 5 other guys. We were north of Bermuda, and the mast on our boat came down. So that was kind of scary for a while. We got rescued by a container ship. So a terrible memory. Maybe that's a terrible memory. Maybe not. It was enlightening in many different ways. Scary. I found a dead body once. That was, I'm going to say that was the most terrifying. I was riding a motorcycle, kind of through the woods off of a road. And I couldn't even tell you, because your mind blocks these things out. I couldn't tell you whether it was male or female. It turned out to be a young woman. But I saw it, and I just was horrified, turned around, went back out to the road, made an X on this country road by skidding my tires, and then went and called the cops. And so terrifying. Since I had nothing to do with it, I wasn't really terrified, but I did spend the night, the person that finds a dead body is the one they point the finger at first. So I spent the night being interviewed. I was never locked up or accused of anything, but I spent the night being interviewed, and they finally realized, it couldn't have been me, not right. But they did make me take a lie detector test the next day. And as the police officer who drove me home from the lie detector place, I said to him, well, are they going to tell me how did I do? I mean, come on. He says, let me put it to you this way. I would not be driving you home if you didn't pass the test.
Enough said. At that point, I would just keep quiet, get home.
Yeah.
Wow. I had a similar experience actually in New Haven, Connecticut, where it was a Saturday morning. I was walking along the pier, and it was in the river there, and the body was there, and I had called the cops. When they came to clear the scene, the first question the officer asked me was, did you touch the body or attempt to rescue? And I'm going, the body is 50 feet away from me. It was in the water floating. Do I look wet? But to your point, the next few days, they came to my home and they were just asking questions, and it was unsettling at first, because how about the victim? What's happening there? And I mean, it turned out to be a suicide and all of that, but it was harrowing momentarily, because this is a life. This isn't, I left my shoe outside. This is a life that's, and it took a few days, but there was a mental dimension to it. But that was interesting. Yeah. So now I've always been curious, what's the earliest gift you remember receiving as a kid?
My first bicycle.
What make and model was it?
It was, I think it was a Schwinn. It was a long time ago. And it was kind of, it was small. Obviously, I was young. I don't remember much more about it. Just there was a shiny bike under the Christmas tree one year.
So were you one of those kids who would wake up in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve just to see the gifts and then pretend to be surprised the next morning?
Wait a minute. Who doesn't? Well, what Christian doesn't, right? I feel sorry for the Jewish people. Although mixed marriages, they celebrate both. So the kids get it.
Why not? Any chance to party, right?
Yeah.
So what was your favorite cartoon character when you were a kid?
Cartoon character. I don't know. The Roadrunner? I don't know. I didn't really I did watch cartoons as any kid did in the 50s, but because that's when I was a kid, was in the 50s. So that's all I can tell you. I don't.
I can see, well, I can relate with the Roadrunner because, I mean, you have, had quite the experiences always on the go. So that kind of makes sense. Now, going back to your sailing experience, you once mentioned you left your boat in Bermuda, your sailboat.
Mm. Do
you miss it?
Well, I didn't leave it in Bermuda. It was when the mast came down, we left the boat floating because the container ship could save lives, but they couldn't save property. Their insurance would pay for anything that would happen when they were trying to rescue us. But if they tried to take the boat in tow or put it on their top of their containers or something, and somebody got hurt, their insurance wouldn't be covering it. So they wouldn't touch the boat, and it floated around Bermuda to the south side and got towed in. By that time, though, the insurance company owned it. So, and it operated as a party boat without a mast in Bermuda's harbor for cruise ship people until about 12 years ago, when a retired policeman bought it and refurbished the whole thing. And I've seen pictures. It's prettier today than it was when I bought it brand new.
Well, I think it's prettier today because as a sailor, you actually sail your boat.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, which I know you also are, you participate and you really enjoy the America's Cup, and you golf and you do, you're very active, that's for sure. Now, on the America's Cup, what would you say about the current state of affairs?
I guess the most exciting America's Cup, actually, that I think about is the one in San Francisco, when we came from, 9 down to win 10 or 11 to whatever. That was an exciting race. I'm not wearing the shirt from that, but that was a very exciting race. But I probably enjoyed as much being in the Hudson River, working the prelims, the Louis Vuitton series in the Hudson River on essentially a chase boat, pushing boats out of the viewer boats, spectator boats out of the racing field, because in a 4-knot current coming down the Hudson River, they were always floating down into the race course, and you had to push them back out. And being on the water with those things zipping by was a lot of fun.
That's interesting. I can imagine. It's just, the one time I attended those, it's all inspiring. You see an entire armada just as far as the eyes can see.
Well, that would be, that wouldn't be the America's Cup. That would be one of the other big races, like the Vineyard Race or the Ida Lewis race up in the Rhode Island area, where you've got 100 or 125 boats taking off. I mean, that is spectacular. I've been in those races, but in the America's Cup, it's definitely a lot about the technology and the big money. I mean, it's just big money that goes into those things, and the whittling down from a dozen maybe entrants or less to, the 2 that end up going head to head. But that's still exciting racing.
So do you think technology and money has made it cost prohibitive, for certain sports? For example, the America's Cup. We think about even golf, because I know you're an avid golfer. certain sports have just become, a combination of technology and money has just limited, broader participation.
I think of skiing in that manner. I don't ski anymore. I've made a conscious decision after coming out of a half pipe, and every bone in my body said, you shouldn't be doing this anymore. You're getting too old for that. But the cost of, when we used to pay, $20 or something like that for a full day skiing, and now it's 100 something or whatever. I've lost track of it actually. So there's a cost prohibition based on money. The cost being so high for some sports, but you're probably more referring to how much money is involved in sports. In a football game, what drives me actually crazy, I always record things like football games because there's however many minutes of actual time, and then there's 4 times that of in-your-face advertisements. I went to a hockey game, the Black Knights, I guess, in Vegas, and they played the Rangers. And I couldn't handle the volume level. I had my fingers in my ears for all of the time, except for when they were playing hockey. On a scale of 1 to 10, the volume of the announcer and the music was typically 10 to 12, just ear shattering. When the players would start to play, they'd stop that, and the volume level on a scale of 1 to 10 was, the stadium or the arena, T-Mobile Arena, I guess it is in Vegas. The level probably was around a 2, with all the people talking and watching the game and everything. When they do a shot on goal, it got up to a 5, and if they scored a goal, maybe it was a 7 or an 8, but never as loud as when the announcers came on and they played music and did all these crazy non-hockey things to fill in time. So a lot has been lost to promoters and promotions and the glitz, and which is all related to the technology ability that is available to the producers today.
So do you think artificial intelligence is a threat to humanity, or do you think it's more of a benefit than a threat?
I think it's probably more of a benefit than a real threat. For some time to come. You never know. I mean, switch could get flipped somewhere and it could be a real problem. But I think there's a lot of good associated with artificial intelligence today.
And do you, in that spirit, then, do you think the access that technology has brought relative to its use, right, do you think it's good for faith? And I don't mean that in a hyper-religious sense. I mean, do you believe a combination of artificial intelligence and the want to use the scaled use of technology has further divided people? It's created more faithless humans, or do you think it's somehow bridging the gap? Because people trust technology today more than they do their fellow humans.
That's a real interesting question, because there's several gaps. One gap is those who are Luddites or don't have the education and don't know how to use technology. There's a whole mass of people that fall into that sort of category. And there's a chasm between them and those that know how to use technology, and things like AI and expert systems, they expect and it doesn't bother them. It's way beyond the mass of people who just don't understand that. They may have a phone, but they don't really have any concept of how it works or, how it works and really technology at all.
Very interesting.
So there's a big gap there. And that's education. I mean, all these things come down to education in the first place. We don't really have good social education as to, how to keep a checkbook online now, but how to keep a checkbook, how to, live somewhere within your means financially, something about economics. I don't think young people get enough of that in school. Practical, here's stuff you need to know for your life. There's got to be one course every semester in high school on that.
Yeah, and that's very dangerous. Which leads me to, as I'm closing this out now, what did you, in your earliest memory as a young man, what did you want to be when you were a young man? What was your ambition?
To build and run my own company and be a millionaire.
Was that before?
Which I succeeded in doing when I was 30. So
interesting. So what was your first car?
A 55 DeSoto. I believe it's a 55 DeSoto with a on the dashboard lever for the gears. Drive, an automatic drive down to neutral and reverse.
That is interesting. And how long did you have it for?
Ooh. Probably only a year. I was like 16 in high school. I had my own business painting houses, so I could afford it, I guess. But better question is, what was my best car was the Green Machine. I bought it. It was a 55 Ford. It was dark green. I bought it for $7.50 from a neighbor who was just sitting by their garage, and she had no use for it. And I said, I'll buy it. And she said, how much you got? And I said, $7.50. I'm making that part up, but I know it was $7.50. And I used that car through college and into the Navy for the first year in the Navy, and probably put 20 to 25,000 miles on it before it blew up on my way down to my ship in Little Creek, Virginia one time.
So you went from turf to surf.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I turned the car over to the tow truck driver. I said, look, there's good tires on here. I think you can get something out of it. I don't want to pay you for this. Why don't you keep the car? And I got a bus or something down to the ship.
That's crazy. Wow.
Anyway.
So finally, what would you want people, friends, family, associates, mentees, advisees to remember you? What do you want to remember about you?
Well, when I get older and I need to think about such things, I'll let you know. I'm not checking out soon as far as I'm concerned. I would like people to say he was a good man, good family man, and a ethical businessman.
That is awesome, Bob. Thank you so much, for being on here, and plenty of insights. And I really look forward to having a follow-on session in the very near future.
All right. Good talking with you as usual.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.